Well, thank you all for joining us for our public service perspectives presentations today. Before we get started, I do just want to remind you all to ensure that your microphone is muted to avoid any disruptions, but we do welcome you all to use the chat to communicate throughout the presentations today. You can also drop your questions in the chat during the presentations for us to address at the end. When we open up Q&A, you can either use the chat to send your questions, or you can use the raise your hand feature, and I will call on you to unmute yourself to ask your question. While our presenters are screen sharing, I do recommend you set your video layout to side-by-side speaker view. You just click the view options at the top of your Zoom and select side-by-side, and you can switch back to active speaker or gallery view after the presentations. The last thing to note is that this session is being recorded. Before I turn it over to our speakers, does anyone in the group have any announcements or upcoming events they'd like to share? We'll put a note out there to please save the date for next Wednesday. April the 7th, we will have Danny Twilley from West Virginia University. He also used to work at Ohio University with us. He will be coming back to do a presentation on the outdoor economy's role in West Virginia's future.
Hello, everyone.
Lorraine, we were just sharing announcements. I didn't know if you had any upcoming sustainability film series events to share with everybody.
Yeah, the next week on April 7th, there will be a film called Motherload, and it explores the use of bicycles for transportations for families. And then our last film of the season is April 21st, and that is on sustainable agriculture and new technologies.
Thanks, Lorraine.
And I urge everyone to look to the Office of Sustainability for celebrating Earth Day, to go to their website.
All right. Well, I'm sure you're all well aware that here at the Voinovich School, our students learn by doing. And so this afternoon, we will be hearing from 3 of our students about their research and programs they've been working with this past year. Before I have them share their work with you, I do want to just take a moment to acknowledge and applaud all of our students for the challenges they've overcome in the past 12 months. They have been able to accomplish so much under these difficult circumstances. So big pat on the back to you all. I know that this has been quite a difficult and challenging year. So I am excited, though, to welcome 3 of our Voinovich students, Master of Public Administration candidate, Aleah Cumberbatch, our Undergraduate Research Scholar, Sam Smith, and Master of Science in Environmental Studies candidate, Pao. Aliyah will get us started with her presentation first. She'll be sharing about her work with the Community of Practice Rural Community Opioid Response Program. That one's a mouthful. And then Sam will share about his role in evaluating the Ohio START program. And Pao will talk about her research in deforestation in Nicaragua. And then at the very end, we will take questions from you all for them. So, all right, I will go ahead and turn it over to Aliyah to get us started here.
Hey everyone, I am Aleah Cumberbatch. I'm a Master of Public Administration candidate, as Mackenzie said, and I'm also a fellow with the Partnership for Community-Based Prevention. Today, I'm going to be sharing a bit about the work that I have been doing with the Communities of Practice for Rural Communities Opioid Response Program, and the work that we have been doing to address stigma related to opioid use disorder and mental illness, and that includes suicide. So first, I wanted to ensure that we all had a shared understanding of what stigma is. Khan Academy describes stigma as discrediting or disproving an individual or group because of an attitude. And we understand that this can lead to individuals having no social acceptance. It can lead to less opportunities, and it can perpetuate inequality in society. I know on the diagram that you see on the left, you see there's a distinction between social stigma and self-stigma. For today's presentation, I'm focusing solely on social stigma and the concepts associated with social stigma. You see the words stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination. I know we have those in conversations, we hear those words a lot, and they're often used interchangeably, but I'm going to describe how they're actually different and the different roles that they play in the stigmatization process. So stereotypes are the beliefs about characteristics about the group. The example that you see there would be that the belief that people who are mentally ill are violent. That is a cognition. Prejudice, on the other hand, refers to the negative evaluation of the group. So that refers to the negative emotions or the effects that someone will have. And an example that you see on the screen would be the negative emotion that they scare me. So individuals who are mentally ill scare me. Discrimination, on the other hand, are the actions that derive from the prejudice and the stereotypes that someone may hold. So the example that you would see is that an individual won't hire someone because of this fear that they have and this belief that individuals who are mentally ill are violent. So now that we have this shared understanding of stigma, we can discuss the framework, which is what we have been working with. So that is the Health, Stigma and Discrimination Framework. And it was created by Stangl and colleagues to address stigma in communities or in organizations or agencies across the state. So we use it specifically to address mental health, but it can be used to address health conditions. The framework really breaks down the stigmatization process into socioecological levels and the domains of the stigmatization process. So the socioecological levels, which will be the image that you see at the bottom, the text that looks like a pyramid, those are the socioecological levels. And these are the social and structural elements that impact the stigmatization process. They're especially important because they help people who would like to intervene to recognize where would be the best place in society for me to place my efforts or place my focus. So those are the socio-ecological levels. We see they build from public policy, which refers to the laws and policies that exist at a national level or at a local level. We then see it kind of goes a little deeper into the community, and community refers to the norms or the values that a community holds. We then look at the organizational level, which refers to the organizations, the social institutions, or the workplaces that exist within our communities. And then if we go up a tier, we look at the interpersonal, and this will refer to those social networks or those social groups that exist in our communities, whether it be friends, families, co-workers, that's the interpersonal level. And then finally, we go up to individuals, and this will focus on the knowledge, skills, and the attitudes of individuals in our community. So the socio-ecological levels, that breakdown is very helpful in determining where to place our attention when addressing stigma. The framework then explains the domains of the stigmatization process. So we describe drivers and facilitators, with drivers being, I consider them those things in society that kind of kickstart the stigmatization process. So drivers would be inherently negative. Facilitators, on the other hand, can be negative or they can be positive. So they're those things that perpetuate stigma. So they'll be cultural norms. The reason that I say they can be positive is because sometimes it may have been something that was intended to be helpful or to be useful, but they end up perpetuating that stigma for a specific group. So that's why facilitators can be positive or negative, whereas drivers are solely negative. The drivers and facilitators will then determine if stigma marking occurs. So when we say stigma marking, we're pretty much talking about, okay, so who does society deem the targets of this stigmatization? Who do they decide to target, or what are the groups that are targeted for stigmatization? And the framework recognizes that stigmatization can occur because of a health condition, or it can occur because of social traits that individuals have, whether it be their race, their gender, sexual orientation, etc. What is really noteworthy is that this framework recognizes that there is intersection, and the two are not independent of each other. We can see individuals who are mentally ill be in a racial group or a gender that is minoritized. So recognizing that there is crossover with the two, and that's really something that's important with this framework. And once we have stigma marking, that then leads to manifestation. So what are the experiences that individuals have? On that list, you see stuff such as secondary stigma, and secondary stigma isn't often discussed, but that is stigma that friends or family can have simply by their association with someone who is in that stigma. So having a close relation to a family member who is mentally, how can that stigma affect me? And then stigma practices, we see the terms that we just described, stereotypes and prejudice coming up in that category. And I know that you also saw in the image on the bottom for drivers and facilitators, you'll also see that stereotypes are there as well. That's because stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination, as much as they kickstart that discrimination process, they also perpetuate it. So it kind of loops back, if you want to think of it in that sense, with why you would see the stereotypes and prejudice also being referred to in that manifestation section. And then finally, we look at the outcomes. So how the populations that are stigmatized affected, but also how are organizations and institutions affected. So for individuals who have been stigmatized, we see that as much as there is mostly negative outcomes, there may be positive outcomes. An example of a positive outcome is that we see more resiliency among individuals who are in a stigmatized group. We also see advocacy kind of occurring a little bit more. So those are the few positives that can occur, but mostly negatives, which we see with access to justice and that inequality that I spoke about earlier when describing what exactly stigma is. And for organizations, we see stigma appear in policies, in the media, and so many other things. To the left of that diagram, there would be some text and a few little arrows, and that pretty much breaks down who should focus on what area. And we see that for the drivers and facilitators, stigma marking and manifestation, that is an area of particular importance to individuals like us who are focused on intervention and research. So I would like you to remember that, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as I begin to talk about the work that we have been doing. And this image is just an example of how it can be applied to a real life situation or a real life condition. And we see mental health. So with that driver being the belief that persons with mental health issues are dangerous. And then how those facilitators, such as the belief that persons with mental health issues are incompetent. So we see how this can be applied to real life conditions. And that's how we used it for our work with the CoP-RCORP. So now we lead to the work that we have been doing now that we understand the framework. Our goal is to reduce stigma within CoP-RCORP service areas. And we know that that is a big task in and of itself. So the first step was to create a stigma summary sheet. And that is the image that you would see on the right of the screen. And as I just mentioned earlier, there are areas of particular importance for individuals who would like to do research or do intervention. And so we focus on those areas you see on the sheet. You would see drivers, facilitators, the intersections. So those areas that are very useful when trying to create programs to address stigma. So we sought out as a group to look at those areas and really did a deep dive, kind of breaking down stigma related to mental health and substance use disorder into those sections. Once we completed the stigma summary sheet, we then sought out to accumulate existing literature on stigma and finding surveys that assessed stigma at various levels and not just related to mental health. We wanted to get a broad scope. Myself and two undergraduate research scholars, Rory O'Malley and Abigail Zuna, we kind of got into that research phase of accumulating all of this information that we found would be helpful. And once we gathered that information, we then started to explore a community survey. And that will be a socio-ecological level, as we discussed earlier, and those tiers, that pyramid. Community is one of the levels. So we decided to do a community survey, splitting that survey into two groups. So we are going to do a mental health and suicide survey, and then we're doing a substance use disorder and a opioid use disorder survey. And I'm happy to say that we finished the substance use disorder and opioid use disorders draft. So we have all the questions and we're now in the process of formatting those questions and getting them ready to be sent out to communities. And we are working on the mental health survey questions and deciding what exactly are the questions that we'd like to ask to get the data that we think would be helpful. So we've made a lot of progress in that regard. And finally, just explaining the explainer video that we have been working on. So we found that this framework is so beneficial. It can be so helpful, not just for us and not just for mental health, but for individuals who are just interested in addressing stigma in their respective fields. The multi-level framework is beneficial. The fact that they don't just focus on individuals, but they recognize that stigma happens in communities. It happens through policy. It happens at organizations. So recognizing these different levels. The framework also does a really good job of not creating that us versus them distinction. Language can kind of perpetuate stigma, so they were very conscious of the language that they use in this framework. And then we know that it can be applied to different fields. So we found that it was so beneficial for us, but it required a lot of time and a lot of effort. We had to do weeks of studying the framework. We had to dedicate time to breaking down the framework, explaining different aspects of the framework to one another, having very deep and long discussions. And we understand that not everyone will have the time to commit to studying the framework as we did, but we still think that it would be so useful for so many people. And so that's where an explainer video comes in, and that's where we think it would be handy to get that information to others, make it accessible to many individuals who would like to create programs to address stigma, but may not have the time to really study this framework. And the benefit of an explainer video is that it's very concise. It's 3 to 5 minutes long, and they are visual aids for individuals like myself who learn more by seeing images. We're going to include those in the stigma explainer video, and we use the analogy of a house that is on fire, comparing that to the stigmatization process, and then individuals who are interested in the process, deeming them sort of the investigators who are here to figure out, so what is the cause of this fire, or what is the cause of this stigma? So that is the work that I have been doing with the CoP-RCORP. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me today. I look forward to any questions that you have, and I would now like to hand over to Sam Smith to present his research.
Hi, everyone. I am Sam Smith, and I'll be talking a bit today about my experience as an undergraduate research scholar. So I am from Chillicothe, Ohio. I am a senior majoring in geography with minors in globalization and development. I am majoring in geography with a specialization in globalization and development and minoring in French and political science. I'm also currently working on my senior thesis, which functions as a discourse analysis on gentrification in the south side of Columbus, Ohio. And then after this, I'm hoping to do grad school starting in the fall. And it looks like since I've submitted these slides, I will be starting grad school. So I'm excited to do that. So I've been working with the Partnership for Children and Families, formerly known as the Peer Team. My primary supervisor is the phenomenal Margaret Hutzel, although I've had the great fortune of working with some other people in that partnership, including Beth Trimble and Natalie Wilson and others. So it's been a great team to be on and a great group of people with whom I'm working. And I am running back into the same exact issue where it won't switch. Oh, there we go. It's just a little slow. So some of the projects I've worked on have centered around data analysis. So Bailey's Trail Survey, the Ohio University, and more specifically, Ohio Health COVID Response Survey, Logan Hawking School Climate Survey, things of that nature, where I've been especially looking at open-ended responses to these surveys and sort of quantifying them in ways that are useful to stakeholders. And then I've also done some data entry for the prep evaluation, which has been really fun. But, and again, we're having a little bit of hesitation here. I apologize for that, but I'm assuming it'll probably go.
Sorry, Sam, do you want me to go ahead and advance the slides for you?
Yeah, that might be good.
Just tell me when to follow along. No worries. Give me 1 second here. Thanks everyone for your patience. Sorry about this. All right.
Great. So I mentioned some of the other projects I've done, but really the lion's share of my work as a research scholar has been in the Ohio START program evaluation. And so START stands for Sobriety, Treatment, Reducing Trauma. And it's an evidence-based model that helps public children's services agencies bring together caseworkers, behavioral health providers, and family peer mentors into teams dedicated to helping families struggling with co-occurring child maltreatment and substance use disorder. So in a way, following Aliyah's excellent presentation, this is a related topic. that we're looking at here with START. And it is a systems change model, and it's been very, it's been a revelatory experience for me to get involved with this. Its benefits are keeping children in the home, firstly, so instead of being removed and put in foster situations, it connects families to resources and to treatment more quickly through its intensive provision of services and close contact and frequent contact. And then it also builds bridges between families and children's services because, again, going back to Aliyah's presentation, there's so much stigma, often justifiably, that exists going from families to children's services families who don't want to lose their children. But there's also sometimes a less justified stigma going from children's services to families who are acutely facing substance use disorders. And START really aims to build that bridge between children's services and families. And so we can transition to the next slide here. Thank you. So just a little bit of background about START. Its first implementation was in 1997 in Ohio in Cuyahoga County, but it wasn't until 2006 that the first nearly statewide implementation of the program began in Kentucky. And then in 2017, then Attorney General Mike DeWine launched the first cohort of Ohio START. And so that's where we are today. And then moving on, we can talk a bit more about the cohorts. And so today, Ohio START has been rolled out in 4 different cohorts. It's served 1,870 Ohioans and 1,044 children in 52 counties. So that's, more than half of the way to being in all of Ohio's 88 counties. And the Voinovich School has been involved at every step of the implementation so far. So you can see that cohort 1, which is the light blue color on this map, was launched in 2017 and predominantly Appalachian Ohio counties, including Athens County. And then cohort 2 was launched in 2018. And then cohort 3, which we're evaluating now, was launched in 2019. And then this year, cohort 4 is being launched. And so we can move on to the next slide. And so the Voinovich School, in evaluating Ohio START, partners with the Ohio State University College of Social Work for the Public Children's Services Association of Ohio. And effectively, PCSAO has asked us to conduct staff and parent participant interviews to understand what's working with the model, what needs to be reinforced, and what's not working so well, especially in terms of the rollout and what might need to be changed. And as I mentioned, the Voinovich School has been involved in this evaluation closely since the start, and it looks like it will continue to be involved into the future, which is a really exciting thing from a research perspective. And so my role in this evaluation particularly has been pretty comprehensive. When I first joined, we were doing interviews, and this is all in cohort 3, keep in mind. So we were doing interviews with staff. And this is when, of course, when I first joined the position, Margaret told me about Ohio START, but it was during these interviews that I really grasped the levity of this program and how it's bringing change to traditional forms of children welfare services. And so that was when I really got excited about this initiative. And of course, before coding, I had to clean a lot of interviews, both my own and those of others. And that was a process, but it was a useful one in developing my own capacities as a researcher. And then I was able to use NVivo to code these interviews, again, not just my own, but all the ones that we've done. And I'd had some exposure to NVivo through courses before this position, but it's been in this position that I've been really able to dig deeper with that. As we moved through coding, I started to look at some literature to tie what we were doing in with the greater academic understanding of not only START, but also the family peer mentor aspect of START. And then now we're getting into some analysis and summarization. So I've really had a comprehensive experience with this evaluation and getting to know this program. And it's been a really formative one. And so we can continue to the next slide. Yes. What we've done, what I found, I mentioned how important those interviews were in forming my understanding of Ohio START. And what was immediately clear to me was that family peer mentors are unique. And I think all of the other researchers in this project agree with me. These are individuals strictly defined with a minimum of 2 years in long-term recovery from a substance use disorder and many with experience with the child welfare system. So effectively, these are people who are able to leverage their lived experience These are unique people. And what we found during our literature review is that their perspectives, I'm sorry, I'm getting an unstable connection. I hope you all can hear me. If not, feel free to send a message or interrupt. But their perspectives have been academically underrepresented, especially in terms of their perceptions of their own role. And so this is obviously an important gap that needs filled. So, and through our evaluations, we've spoken with around 15, we've conducted 15 interviews with 14 family peer mentors. One respondent was interviewed twice. But in terms of qualitative data, this is a decent sample size. And so what we decided to do was use this rich data we've gathered, this rich qualitative data, and use it to contribute to the academic literature on family peer mentors. And so I just like to briefly go over some of the themes that we've identified based on all of these interviews we've conducted and that we'd like to publish. And so continuing on, the first theme is that family peer mentors do a lot. Some of their roles include connecting families with resources and treatment, or serving as role models, offering transportation, facilitating meetings, enrolling families in benefit programs, and more. One really common thread of dialogue that we heard from family peer mentors is that they'll do whatever they need to be effective servers of families and for recovery. And with the advent of phones, and of course, during COVID specifically, when everything is virtual, this is a position that, both in its roles and in its time requirements, goes well beyond the normal requirements of a 9 to 5, 40-hour a week position. This is really a 24/7 position, and that you can be driving a family to church on Sunday or calling about a crisis in the evening. And because of this wide array of things that you could be doing as a family peer mentor, role clarity can sometimes be a little lacking. And so this brings us to the next theme of what we found was that sometimes when roles weren't clear, especially with the caseworker, there was frustration.
Sam, I think we're having some connectivity issues again.
To provide services. And so one key to successful relationships between these two workers are clearly defined roles. And this came up a decent amount in our research. And so moving on, we can talk about our next theme, which has been the fact that family peer mentors care about and are concerned for their families. And this is kind of logical, right? These are people who are voluntarily re-implicating themselves in really charged experiences, things that might be triggering for them because they've lived these things in various ways, not identically to their clients and families, but in similar ways. And so this leads to a deep emotional investment, which is a primary strength of the role. The fact that family peer mentors care so much, but at the same time, it can also present challenges, right? They're re-implicating themselves, as I mentioned, into really triggering and difficult times of their lives. And so this led one of our respondents, for example, had to recuse themselves in certain situations that were too emotionally charged and that were too evocative of their own challenges they'd experienced during their recovery. It's also been found in other more quantitative studies of family peer mentors that over a period of several years, about 1/3 ended up leaving the position largely because of challenges to their own recovery. So this is a deeply emotionally intimate role. And then there's one more theme that I'd like to discuss, and that's that they know they're making a difference, even, among these challenges. They can, they're very vocal. They've been very vocal in our research about how they see the direct effect of their work. So firstly, they tend to make families who are involved in START more cooperative and driven. And this is because a lot of the families, or partly because a lot of the families involved in START, have had prior involvement with the child welfare field. And sometimes there is, rightfully so, a perception that they will lose their children, that they'll be put into foster homes, and that they're not really, that child welfare services aren't really there in the best interest of their actual recovery. What family peer mentors are able to, by being an actual peer of people facing substance use disorders, they're able to create a bridge that leads. Sorry, I'm getting an unstable connection notice again. But anyway, they're able to serve as a bridge that makes families more central to their own recovery. And this is not just family peer mentors who do this, but START in general. Family-driven recovery is a key component. And then on the other side, they also reduce stigma held by coworkers, right? So a lot of times people working in child welfare may not have gone through substance use disorders themselves. Mackenzie, could we go back to the last slide, please? Thank you. A lot of times people working in child welfare aren't people who have faced substance use disorders themselves, and they might, they might have some stigmas against people facing them, whether acutely or in recovery. And so family peer mentors combat this both directly and indirectly. Directly by serving as advocates for families. There were several instances where family peer mentors would speak up and on behalf of families in cases when they thought that the path that the things were taking with child welfare wasn't the optimal path. This could also be indirectly, just in that working with someone who has faced a substance use disorder and is in recovery from one and might have a criminal background. Even when you work with someone and realize that they're not, the horrible person you thought they were, that your stigma said they were, that erodes stigmas in a direct, but also, not through direct confrontation. And then finally, they do see how their own recoveries are positively influenced by this position. They're able to take their lived experience and leverage it to the benefit of others. And that is rewarding. And they were able to, through the challenges, navigating these challenges, they were able, inherent to the role, which is, again, so emotionally intense, they were still able to find ways that strengthen them in their own recoveries. And they were, again, this is something they were very cognizant of as they worked as family peer mentors. And so we're moving on to the conclusion now. This has been a really interesting process for me. You can see my academic background isn't necessarily in child welfare. It's not in social work, but this is something that is, hugely important in Ohio. So it's been really great for me to expose myself to it in this position and to understand it more profoundly. We're still in the writing process. We do intend or hope, or we might present our findings to the Stark County Consortium meeting on May 12th. And I just like to close by just, speaking broadly about my role as a Voinovich scholar, as an undergraduate research scholar, more specifically. It's been really fulfilling. I could talk in depth about all of the new capacities I've gotten in things like SPSS or in Vivo or Excel. It's the timing's been great. I mentioned I'm doing my thesis. I've been able to borrow research methods and little practices I've gained working with Margaret and others and apply those to my thesis. And then I mentioned grad school as well. And I recently found out that being a research scholar was instrumental in me not only getting accepted, but in getting funding as a graduate student. So just so many ways this position has opened doors for me, and it's been really fulfilling. So I just like to voice how grateful I am to everyone in the Voinovich School for facilitating this opportunity. So feel free to email me if you have any questions, or again, I'll be here once Pal is presented, or find me on LinkedIn. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Pal, and thanks very much, everyone.
Hey, Pal, you're still muted.
Great. Thanks for letting me know.
No worries.
I'm Pau Munoz, and I'm going to talk about deforestation and Idiomais in biological reserve in Nicaragua. So Nicaragua, it's located in Central America. It's one of the 7 countries in Central America. And I chose Nicaragua because I grew up actually less than 50 miles away from their border. Nicaragua is also the poorest country in the region, which the lowest gross domestic product per capita. in place, and they have one of the lowest human development index in the region also, which means that it's usually the gross human development index measures the long and extended life, the knowledge and decent standard of living on the sector. So I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the place, and we're going to start way over before 1969, 1950s, when the president of that time, Anastasio Somoza, decided to take advantage of what was happening between the United States and Cuba, and the president decided to land grab, to steal farmers' lands, and for trying to grow more sugarcane and cotton for selling it for Nicaragua, for United States. So what happened with farmers is like they were promised more lands. So they could take as many lands as they wanted from the Caribbean region, just because, as you can see, there was plenty of forest. So no one was really using that land. As a fun fact, they are indigenous communities all in the Caribbean coast. So as we can see, we will focus mainly on the green patches, which are the forests, and we can see how the deforestation is being increasing all the years. I just want to give us a fun fact that in the 1980s, like between the 70s and 80s, there was like a civil war in Nicaragua, which stopped in 1990, actually with the creation of national parks. And now it's increasing a lot, but something that is happening also, like the president that it's right now, it started in 2010, 2007, and there's a big struggle between the government and the civil community starting in 2018 up to date. So I am also kind of curious if that it's affecting or not the deforestation rates in the area. But that time, in between the 1990 and 2000, the deforestation rate in Nicaragua was 3%. So we can have that in mind. I chose the place that I'm going to study because I overlap the protected areas in Nicaragua with the deforestation rate gave by Global Forest Watch in a timeline of 10 years, of 8 years. And we saw that there was this region in particular, they had around 18% of deforestation in less than 10 years. So I was very concerned, and I decided to choose Indio Maiz Biological Reserve as my study point. And as I did some other studies before I came here, I found possible drivers. I'm not 100% sure if they are, but I found like several economic activities and other situations, social situations that they were happening around the biological reserve, which are, like cattle ranching, deforestation, oil palm plantations. Thanks to oil palm plantations and the Nicaragua Interoceanic Canal, people were also displaced, so they need to find new place to live. And 2016 and 17, it started like a big craziness about like to start doing gold mining around the protected area. And for sure, we have seen some fires and hurricanes that they are affecting. So I wanted to know if which one of these will be a main driver of deforestation. And also like to know if the protected area was truly protected, and if people was still continuing protecting the area, like people who live around it. So for identifying the status of the Indio Maiz Biological Reserve in Nicaragua, I compared the protected area with non-protected area. For doing that, I couldn't compare it with the entire country. So I chose a 10-kilometer buffer to compare it in order to have a better sense of what is happening. And for that, I had to create a map, a land use map in Indian Maize Biological Reserve by 2020, which, as a fun fact, it's a rainforest. It's cloudy all the time. So it was very, very hard to create. Also, when I made this, I created a land use change map between 2010, 2015, and 2020. And when I have all the maps, I could extract the deforestation rates and fragmentation index. And with the land use map, I could try to identify the possible drivers of deforestation in the protected areas. So in order to rectify my map, I needed to go down to Nicaragua because of COVID and the autocratic government that Nicaragua has. It was actually very dangerous to go. So I made collaboration with Central Humboldt. I made a partnership with them, and they helped me to go on site and to take photos to later on rectify my map. For creating the map, I used 3 satellite images, Sentinel-2A, which are 10-meter resolutions. I correct the images atmospherically with semi-automatic classification. I also supervise the classification, and I made the corrections of the maps using a base layer from PlanetScope, which are free for everybody, and they are very updated for Latin America, which is actually not happening with the other base layer that it could be from Google Maps or Google Earth and Bing. Also, the accuracy assessment, as I told you, they were made by control points by Central Humboldt personnel. For doing the land use land cover change map, I had to use my Marenas, which is the Ministry of Environmental Natural Resources in Nicaragua. I used their map from 2010, and also the Marena and Central Humboldt made that map in 2015. And for sure, I used my map for making the 2020. Also, for another deforestation rate, I used the calculations from the Food Agriculture Organization that it's more accurate, so we can do it per year. And the forest fragmentation index, I use landscape ecology statistics from QGIS. They use as a base the FragStat app. So this is my baby. After so many time, I ended up making this map in 2020. This is a big, a robust information, and it's not just an image. We can get a lot of data from it. So as you can see here, I have 10 main land uses from these areas. So I try to take the other maps from the other years, and I created only those 10 layers, so it will be better to compare over the years. And here we are. We compare like the protected area with non-protected area. We can see, yes, it looks like a higher deforestation outside of the protected area than inside. But that doesn't mean that deforestation is not significantly. Actually, as we can see, like it looks like there are big differences. So for putting those differences in numbers, like it helps a lot. The deforestation rate that between 2010 and 2015, we can see that deforestation rate in Indian Maize inside of the protected areas was a 0.1 versus the 4.3% outside, but it's increasing inside the protected area to 0.9, and is decreasing the deforestation rate outside of the protected area in 2.1. In overall, between 2010 and 2020, the deforestation rate, it's not change, like it's not very different from inside and outside the protected area. And probably those numbers were going to decrease in comparison. So it means that it looks like the projection it's sending, it's getting to a higher deforestation rate inside of the protected area. For making the forest fragmentation index, I decreased the number of values to just 4. So we will compare open areas, low tree cover, moderate tree covered, and close tree covered. And I used, I'll show just 2 of many graphs that I can get for forest fragmentation index. So to show you the level of heterogeneity that we can see between the patches inside of the protected area than outside. What does it mean? Well, it says that there are more patches per year in both regions. And how complex are these? Well, actually, this fractal dimension index, don't get very scared with the numbers. What it's telling me is like in 2015 in both regions, there was more deforestation, but actually throughout the years, the patches are getting closer. So you can find more patches of the same thing closer to each other. And that means that they are creating more of the same patches, and mainly from moderate and low type of forest or cover forest. And this is very important because here in Nicaragua, they are not using big machines for deforestation. They are just doing it by hand. So what it means moderate is like they are decreasing a little bit the forest cover in moderate, and they continue cutting down. So that's why it turns to low. And at the end is just an open area. So it takes time to go to that sector. So if we make basic projections, and if Nicaragua, it will be in the biological reserve, it will be in a bubble, it will take like 100 years to change the ratio of forest non-forest, that we will have more non-forest than forest. But what is happening is like it's not in a bubble. And we have a lot of non-protected areas around that actually in less than 3 years is going to turn that ratio that there's going to be more non-forest than forest in the region. So that will highly increasingly affect the inside of the protected area. So this will be like a huge expansion in some few years. As conclusions, I want to just let you know that I successfully created the map. In the 2020, I could compare for making the land use map in 2010, 2015, and 2020. The deforestation rate per year in the buffer zone was higher than inside of the protected area, yes, but we can also see the deforestation rate inside of the protection area is increasing, and that contrary of the buffer zone that it's decreasing. Also, the fragmentation index is showing us the number of patches are higher, so that means they are creating more deforestation, and they are doing it just by little. They are decreasing the tree coverage little by little up to get more grass. And the main driver of deforestation, we can just say it's mainly cattle ranching. That we can see all those big patches of forest, as we can see over here, of grass, sorry, that we can see over here. And as recommendations, thanks to the creation that I created the 2020 map, now we can make future projects like trying to interconnect the increase of deforestation with the social events that are happening in the country, that the violence government against the population and the COVID-19, are they really affecting this increasement of deforestation rate? So that's a very great, interesting comparison, and also to reevaluate the borders of the protected area and evaluate the strength of the protection. So if they are not truly assessing the protection of these areas, can the indigenous communities be involved and monitor and sanction these regions? Thank you for your attention. And I'll stop sharing. Thanks, Mackenzie.
Thank you. Thank you, Aleah. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Pao. Appreciate you guys sharing your presentations today. And I want to turn it over to the audience, where I see a lot of clapping hand reactions. So great job. If anyone wants to use the reaction to raise their hand, I can call on you to unmute yourself to ask your question, or feel free to drop your questions in the chat.
This question is for Aliyah. I was wondering, and I may have missed it, but when the survey on stigma is going to be rolled out and where the results will go? I probably missed it.
Thank you for asking. So I did not actually discuss when the survey would be rolled out, but that would be dependent on the progress that we make with the mental health survey. The good thing is that because we have completed the substance use, we can pretty much kind of copy a lot of those questions for the mental health. So it won't be a lot of in-depth work, but hopefully within the next few months, that survey would be distributed to communities in Ohio.
Thank you. Stigma has definitely been discussed within the START initiative that Sam talked about as a barrier at times.
Let me see, we have a hand raised here. Demoina, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the presenters. I have a question for Paul. I'm very impressed by the maps that you've developed, and I was wondering how did you work with the predicted area management team and how they think they can use those maps for decision making, because you are showing exactly what's going on, and sometimes there is very often a lag between the knowledge that we produce and then really the decision making on the ground. Thank you.
So I think I didn't hear exactly the question, but I don't know if it was like if I am going to share this with the decision makers.
Yes, if you can share, or if you have already shared the results with the decision makers at the predicted area level.
Oh yeah. So this map is freshly made. It came right out of the oven. It's not shared yet, but I am working in collaboration with the Central Humboldt, and they will have it available. Also, they are part of the team of decision makers in a way, because they are the ones who give recommendations to the government when they decided to accept recommendations from external people. So yes, and we also are working in other projects for going further with this information that we're having and we're making. And the idea is that this is not going just for the government decision makers, also for NGOs, that they will be able to work with the social, with the communities around the region.
Thanks, Pal. Do you have any other questions coming in? Well, I will selfishly go ahead and ask a question. And actually for all of you, you all are working with teams here, and I'm kind of curious, in what advice you would give other students that are going to be working on, projects as well with different partners and stakeholders. And obviously there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Vaccinations are rolling out, but there will still be some challenges over the next year, working with people remotely. Can you all talk to a little bit how you worked with these partners and how you worked with these stakeholders on these surveys, on these maps, on all of your projects? I'll have Aliyah start, and then Sam and Pau.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I think a lot of that had to do with the leadership that I had, which is Dr. Raffle. She was very much active in terms of communicating with communities through frequent emails. So before meetings and after meetings, we'd often send out agendas, and there was frequent discussions between us at Ohio University and PIO, which is another organization that we collaborate with, and the communities. So I think that would be the biggest tip, especially as we are all remote and working with so many stakeholders, to ensure that there's frequent communication between all involved parties.
Mackenzie, I absolutely agree with your point that it's going to take some time to readjust to just normal in-person communication. I feel as though I've forgotten to socialize. I was actually talking to Margaret about this the other day. And that's a segue into my response to this question, I guess, similar to Aleah. It's just the people you're working with are, a huge part of it. I've not done much of the communicate or any of the communication really with external collaborators in terms of working on my role of the project, though. Yeah, having reoccurring schedules of meetings, holding the best function with teams, I think, is the reoccurring meeting one where you can just set a time every week and talk. That's been crucial to keep me to task, and also to make sure it stays frontal, I guess, in my mental to-do list. So I would just say, yeah, it's between, the fact that I've been working with really good people who've been able to keep me accountable in this process of working on this, and then the fact that I have the ability to, just have these reoccurring meetings to discuss next steps and to review and work on things. That's been huge during the pandemic.
In my case, I think it was thanks to COVID that I did this partnership, because I had to make a huge turnover to my thesis, and I started to see or to watch more webinars from around the globe, and especially about Nicaragua. And I watched one of these, and I created the connection with them. And so we started to chat. And I would say, just take advantage of the many conferences that you can go, that they will be important for you. And try to talk after the conference, like the same way that you will do it on site. Try to do it online. Now we have just the chat. You can just send an email. They will answer as soon as they can. And I created this, and also try to not do it as formal as you think it will be, because in the moment that you get a level of confidence with the other partnership, they are more open to share more information or more data with you, the same way as you will do it with your colleague if it will be sitting right next to you. So just take advantage of the new set of cards that we have, and create more collaboration around the globe. And now we can do it from here, from your desk.
Thank you all. Those are really great recommendations, and it's good to hear, your experiences and how you still worked with these partners and stakeholders and figured out how to collaborate through this crazy year it's been. And Pal, to your point too, I think that's the nice thing. Even example right now is we have people attending this event here that wouldn't have been able to travel up to the ridges and hear your presentations today. So there are some positives of that, and I want to congratulate you all on all you've been able to do this past year and all you've accomplished with your work. I realize we are at time. I want to be respectful of your afternoon. So thank you all for presenting today. Those that are still on, please save the date for next Wednesday, April 7th. We will have Danny Twilley joining us. He will be presenting on the initiatives that he's working on with West Virginia University on leveraging the outdoor recreation assets in West Virginia to increase their prosperity for the state. Thank you all again. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Get outside, go see those cherry blossoms, and have a great rest of your week. Thanks.